This podcast is sponsored by Aleppo Restaurant on Wonderland Road North and A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be listening. We welcome you back to another edition of the Vickers Crossing Podcast, a podcast where faith intersects with the public square. And this is our first podcast of 2020.
Wow. Ooh, ah.
Sound effects, Ian, sound effects. So we're celebrating
Amazing.
that. Welcome aboard, everybody. My name's Rob Henderson, and I'm the priest at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London, and I'm here again with Kevin.
I am Kevin George, and I am the priest here at St. Aidan's Anglican Church, from where we are podcasting today.
All right.
And we got our good buddy.
I'm Ian.
Producer Ian
Of course, right, I forgot. I have a title now.
of the Church of Producer Ian.
He is, yeah.
And
I have a church now? That's news to me.
we'll set you up.
You know
Sweet.
what, man? You're your own preacher.
But of course, also a student at Fanshawe College in the
That too.
Music Industry Arts program, and our illustrious master of keeping us on the air
He's
for the
amazing.
last 18 months.
Man's amazing.
So that's good. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're glad you're here with us and glad to kick off a new year of the Vickers Crossing podcast. And as always, we want to give a big shout out to our sponsors of the podcast here that help us keep things going whenever we gather together. We want to say hi to our friends at Aleppo Restaurant at 666 Wonderland Road here in London, and our good friends Dave and the gang at A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. Now, how did that come out? That last part.
I like that.
Did you like that?
I like
Did
that.
you like
It
it?
sounded good.
I like that.
Well, I hope it went okay because Dave's actually sitting 2
Yeah.
feet to my left.
You can't see him on Facebook because he's in witness protection.
Witness protection.
But,
That's right. Don't tell anybody
if you
he's
look
here.
closely, you'll see he brought some nice teal color glasses for us today.
He did,
I
Dave.
can't tell you what's in them, but
Here's to you and thank you.
It rhymes with Lowe's. And it's from up in Eastern Ontario area, I understand.
And I've got a little bit of a crack in my canoe.
You got a crack in your canoe, yeah. So thank you to Dave.
Thank you to Dave for that. No, it's good that he's here today because not only did he bring us beverage and food, he brought us a family member who we're thrilled to have on the podcast to kick off the new year with us today. So we
Excited
want
for this.
to welcome into the show Peg Herbert today. Peg, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Great to be here. It's a beautiful day in London.
It is, yeah. Actually, we got through our little storm and
Yeah.
nice sunny day today, and so we're glad you're with us. I know you're in London just for a few days visiting,
Yes.
so we're going to find out a bit more about you and a little bit about what you do in another part of the world.
That's right.
Peg's come to us from Africa, where
Wow.
she spends most of her time now.
Furthest
And,
guest?
Pardon me?
Furthest guest?
I would say
I
so.
would think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you would win
Nice.
the prize for that.
Did we have a budget for that?
Do we have a? I don't know if we do or not. I don't know.
Just to clarify, I spend most of my time in Canada.
Most of your time
okay,
in
of
Canada.
course,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Well, we're
But you
glad
spend a
you're
fair
here
bit
today.
of time in Africa.
Yes, the first 10 years, I spent 4 to 5 months a year there.
Oh, wow.
And now between 2 and 3.
Okay,
John.
well, good for you.
Good.
So it's a lot, cumulatively years.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we'll give Peg a more formal introduction here coming up in a bit, and we want to talk a little bit about her ministry and some of the great work she's doing there, because it's a wonderful story, and
Yeah,
we want
it's
to get the
incredible.
word out to as many people as we can. So, but before we get to all that, we're going to do, I guess, maybe do a little catch up. We haven't seen each
Yeah.
other since
God,
since
it's been
before
since
Christmas.
before
I think.
Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, Ian, how was your Christmas?
It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the first Christmas break that I had that I didn't have a project to do.
Wow.
All right.
Very good.
So that was brilliant. Like being in college and not having to be like, yeah, I have a math assignment due on the first day back is a great feeling. Yeah. Because I was done. It was amazing.
I feel like we had projects to do over
I
Christmas.
had a couple of
Yeah,
projects.
you
to do.
might
Yeah,
have.
yeah, a couple of projects to do. But that was done, and then now you're back in the swing of things, right?
Yes.
Another semester underway,
Yes.
and all's good, and thumbs
Yeah,
up, and you're
very
clicking
good.
along. And
Yeah.
good. Ian was learning about compressors today in school.
He was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you fellas out there with your nail guns, you need to know a little bit about your compressor. You just ask
Musical
producer Ian.
application.
Producer, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And what about you, my man?
You know,
Couple of projects?
I've had a couple of projects since we last sat down together. You know, we all had Christmas, and It's been a interesting time here at the parish. We had a sort of one of those heavy weeks last week with some dealing with some death and illness and funerals and all that stuff. But our producer or our sponsor knows about all that stuff about
Yes.
funerals. But and of course, sending out thoughts and best wishes to all of my extended family and friends back in Newfoundland who are somewhere below a snowbank right now with us. Probably a 12-pack of beer or something like that. But I'm just happy to be back in the swing of things. It's that time of year. For those of us in church land, we're all engaged in getting ready for our annual meetings now. So that's what we're all buried in.
Yeah, we do
nowadays.
these yearly meetings called vestries.
Yeah.
Which someone asked me last week, what does vestry mean?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know, but I could give it a word or two that I think might, generalize it a bit, but then I'd be swearing. So I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
But it's, so that's kind of a big to do every year that we have to take care of.
Yeah.
That's our January.
So we're into that. And
Yeah.
you too?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, Christmas overall was great. And as we were saying before we signed off last year, it was a busy time, but had a little downtime after. And it's nice to be back in the swing of things. People are checking back in again and gearing up for some new ministries and things in the parish over the next little while and planning for that. So,
And of course, it's just, I mean, for me, I've missed having you guys around and getting to see people.
well, this is kind of this is a fun thing we do.
been a
once week.
big build up of questions for Ian.
Oh, that's right. That's
Right, yeah, that's something.
Yeah, we had to buy some
man.
more bandwidth
Yeah.
to
Wow.
fit all the questions in. So.
Yeah.
Is it bad that I forgot about that segment?
Well, it's not bad, but you're going to be reminded of it.
Right
Okay.
about now, because ladies and gentlemen, it is time for Ask Ian Anything.
Oh my!
And where does our first question from 2020?
Our first question from 2020 comes from Zoe. Zoe has emailed in a question. She'd like to know, she understands, having listened to the podcast a little, that Ian does like the game of hockey.
Yep.
And so she is curious to know what is your favorite hockey team and who would be your favorite hockey player of all time.
Oh, that's a great question. So I grew up, I think I've said this before. I grew up a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. But grammar aside, that would be my favorite team. But when I was in Tyke hockey, my favorite team was the Carolina Hurricanes because they were red.
Well,
For that reason alone. And going off of that, I was also number 12 for the longest time when I was playing hockey. And Eric Stahl, who was on the
great player.
Carolina Hurricanes, was number 12. So he would be qualified as one of my favorite players. So
Whoops. Sorry, everybody.
yeah, that would, I guess, be my favorite player. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Way
I'll
to
stick
go.
with that.
That's
Fair
very good.
Yeah.
What about you? We know where your allegiance is. But
My favorite team is the Detroit Red Wings. My favorite player of all time was Stevie Yzerman,
oh yeah,
now the general manager. So
Yeah.
I was a big Stevie fan for years and years, still am.
yeah.
So
It'll come as a shock to you, but I'm a Montreal
I
fan.
kind of figured
Wow.
that.
I
by
love
looking
the
at
Habs. If you
walls
look around the
here.
decor, and I have a hard time picking my favorite player of all time, but I would say probably Ken Dryden. I think is probably my favorite player of all time. I absolutely loved Ken.
Yeah, I
Dryden.
loved Kenny Dryden growing up too because I lived in Ottawa for a number of years,
Yeah.
and as a kid, those were the games you got in Ottawa. Montreal, you wouldn't get Toronto
Yeah.
games, right?
Yeah.
So I grew up watching him and Guy Lafleur and
Yeah.
Steve Shutt and all those guys. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was awesome. So that's good. Peg, were you a hockey fan at all growing up?
No, my family was.
Yeah. Did
and
you
my
did you have a
brothers
family
played.
team? Team allegiance?
No, I think there's enough competition.
Yeah.
I think intentional competition.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
Ken Dryden, as soon as you mentioned, I remember that game in 1972.
Oh yeah,
Oh, my
the Canada
gosh.
Cup.
Okay. Yeah.
Or
yeah.
the Summit Series.
Summit
Yeah.
Series.
Yeah.
With Russia.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
I was living in Edmonton, the whole city
Yeah, I bet.
was,
Him up against Vladislav Trechak.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
It
one of
was
those
so
times
exciting.
literally the whole country was watching, right?
Yeah, it was
just one of
classic.
those unifying
Classic.
country things
Yeah.
that happened. And
But I
like-
grew up watching Saturday night hockey.
Oh yeah.
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 There wasn't that much on.
I don't know if I saw the Summit Series or not. I could have, but I was one.
You could. You were watching it.
Yeah, well,
You were watching it.
I'm old. So there you go.
No, you're not old.
Yes.
No.
Well, let's. Do you want to do our music?
Yeah,
trivia
let's
this
give
year? But-
Ian one last shot.
Okay, we're gonna.
Because I've stumped you so far.
Yeah,
You
we're no
have.
good at this.
Yeah, we.
Gotcha.
It was really embarrassing, actually.
Yeah. So Ian usually gets them, and then we don't. Like we don't know any current music, obviously.
Right.
So we're gonna ditch this after this week. So
Okay.
Actually, while you get that set up, here's
Yeah.
something I heard from one of my professors. I feel weird calling them professors, but anyway, what was it? It was by the time you're, I want to say 30. I think that's the right age, but I might be entirely wrong. But by the time you're around 30 years old, you stop listening to newer music, because you've sort of grew up with what you like, and then you understand what you like, and then think that the newer quote unquote stuff is different when it's. Yeah. Anyway, I thought that was interesting.
that is cool. It's
That
probably
explains,
about right too.
that explains
That
your
explains our
frustration
stupid.
over the last 6 months.
that explains why we've not a clue.
Because, we have not
I'd be
grown.
interested if Spotify has changed that.
Yeah, I would. That's what I was thinking.
Because their algorithms constantly give you new music.
Yeah,
Well,
because
that's
we got
interesting.
Spotify over the Christmas break, and my dad's been listening to a lot of new stuff too. Same with my mom.
Well, since
Yeah.
you listen to Spotify a lot, let's see if you know this.
I've been cheated, been mistreated.
Do you know what that is? Peg knows what
Peg's
it is.
nodding her head.
I don't. It sounds a little bit like Joni Mitchell, kind of.
Interesting.
But that might be completely off base.
No, not completely, but a bit off base. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Peg will tell you who it is.
Who is it?
Well, I never remember who it was, but when Will I Found Love?
Yeah. When will I be loved?
Beloved, yeah. But I don't remember.
Linda
who it was.
Ronstadt.
Linda
Right.
Ronstadt, yeah.
She's
Yeah.
so great.
Yeah.
Linda Ronstadt and the Stone Ponies.
And the Stone Ponies. That's
Remember
right.
That
Yeah.
was her
course.
band.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the day.
So-
See?
Good burn.
There you go.
That's the old radio DJ in me.
Okay.
Sorry.
All those years doing
Yeah.
oldies radio.
Yeah.
I remember all that.
Rob
stuff.
knows the music.
So that's
She's
good.
done so many genres of music,
Yeah.
from opera
And,
to
if-
country to.
If you've not seen the CNN special they did on her recently, and they rerun those things, I'd encourage you to watch it because it was really quite something. She now has MS, I think,
Yes.
and so she's lost her ability to sing, but she still has a voice, and she's been speaking out against Trump and
Right.
all of what's going on in the U.S. right now and all that stuff. It's been quite interesting, actually.
That's what I found. What I've enjoyed about the streaming services now, that of course are everywhere, but especially like Netflix and stuff. There are a ton of biographies and shows on these musicians, especially the ones from back in the day, but the newer ones as well. And they put these together, and they're really informative. Yeah, really well done. So it's fun to watch.
Yeah.
There's a lot lately.
All right, Rob, introduce our guest.
Yeah, well, Peg Herbert is here today, and just as a little general introduction, and then we'll get into a little bit of what she's doing now. Peg grew up here in London and attended South Collegiate, the fourth of 5 siblings. That would have been quite a house, right? That
Yes.
sounds like it was a lot of fun. And for those of you that are in the London area, you might remember Parnell Foods. And Peg's dad is Doug Parnell of Parnell Foods.
Okay.
Yeah, so a connection there. And her grandfather was a theologian and worked as the dean of Emmanuel College as well. What was his name?
Dawson Matheson.
Okay, okay.
wow.
Very good, yeah. Peg is also an Anglican, which means she loves the back row and cake, right? Those are
Yes,
the two
casserole.
prerequisites,
And
and
casserole.
casserole as
Yeah, I
well.
love a casserole,
And
hot log.
for the last number of years, Peg has been, as we said, spending some time in Africa and has put together a wonderful ministry. It's called Help Lesotho, and she is currently the founder and executive director. And we're going to find out a little bit more about that charity and some of the other things that are going on with Peg. So welcome to the Vicar's Crossing.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Good to have you here.
You know what I heard too?
What's that?
I heard that Peg has actually listened to some of this,
Oh, yes.
and
yes.
she still
I'm a researcher.
She still showed up.
she still came to be on the podcast.
That's right.
It might have been Dave's influence. I don't know, but I mean, like, you know, she listened to this stuff and she still showed up.
Right.
That's incredible.
So take us back to the beginning, Peg. You took a trip to South Africa some years ago, and tell us a little bit about that trip and how it changed your life, because that was really the beginning stages of Help Lesotho, wasn't it?
Actually, it started before that. I have a specialty in cognitive and developmental psychology, and I was teaching graduate courses at the University of Ottawa for years. And one of my students was a high school principal, a science teacher from Lesotho. And Lesotho is a small country landlocked inside of South Africa. It's a kingdom. It's a Commonwealth country. And it's exactly the size of Belgium or Maryland, 30,500 square kilometers. It's the third highest country in the world.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I read
So-
that highest country.
It has the highest low point for those who like trivia. So she wanted to increase the kids were failing at math and science. So she wanted to increase the critical thinking of the kids, and that's my field.
Okay.
So I supervised her work, and she happened to be a nun, Catholic nun from Lesotho. So I'd never heard of the country. This is in 2000. There wasn't that much on the internet about it then to research it, to understand. But at that time, AIDS had come into, been identified and was decimating sub-Saharan Africa. So she told me about all this. We worked really hard together so that she would have something useful to go home with.
Yeah.
And so we ended up forming this friendship. She's the only student I ever became friends with, but based on faith and her incredible passion for her people. They were just suffering terribly. So we worked together. She went home, and 4 years later, I had a span of time, and I prayed about it a lot. I could have gone to the cottage and read books, but
Yeah.
I really felt that I should go over and see her. So it's all her fault. I say this publicly, much
Yeah.
to her delight. But without telling me, she had arranged for me to have a private meeting with the King and the Queen,
Wow.
to lecture at the National University, the College of Education. I did a lecture with a bunch of Jesuit priests on the use of power and authority. Half of them wanted to slit my throat, and the other half wanted to keep me for
Yeah,
life.
well, that'd be
you know?
Jesuits. Yeah.
And I stayed with oblate priests. I stayed in convents. I would
Yeah.
be the only white woman within miles and miles, traveling by myself. Her school was way up in the mountains, and they gave me their car and driver for some weeks. The school did without. But when I went in 2004, Lesotho had the third highest rate of AIDS in the world. Life expectancy was 34.
Wow.
Wow.
People were dying everywhere.
34.
Yes, but they didn't know there was no treatment
Yeah.
outside of the capital city. So if you got HIV or AIDS, you were dead.
Yeah.
I remember in church, this little Anglican church I go to, it's just benches for pews.
Yeah.
And people were just falling over. They were so weak.
Really?
People were dying in the queues at the clinics.
Oh my.
People were dying in taxis. Just as a sidebar to understand how AIDS decimated a country so deeply, about 175 years ago, the Europeans and the Zulus, they pushed this tribe of Basotho people higher and higher into the mountains and took away their gold mines and their diamond mines.
Yeah.
And those men went back to work in the mines because that's what they knew. So for generations, they worked in the mines. They had second families there, and they went home to Lesotho. And they all got AIDS, but they didn't know what it was.
Right.
And during apartheid, Lesotho was strategically very important. A lot of organizations set up in Lesotho because they could be inside of South Africa,
Right.
support the anti-apartheid movement without being perceived to support the South African government.
Okay.
And as soon as apartheid fell, they all left immediately.
Right.
So in 1994, the government of South Africa instituted a quota on the number of foreigners who could work in the mines. So in one day, 100,000 men lost their jobs. So
Wow.
they had AIDS, and they went home and spread it instantly.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So life expectancy was 34, second highest rate of AIDS. So 16 years later, it has the second highest rate of AIDS, the highest rate of TB,
Wow.
one of the lowest life expectancies. And I just couldn't help myself. I was traveling around listening to people. all these children with no parents.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Incredible.
children in the night, they wake up, what will happen to me?
Right.
So yeah, so
You know?
you go and you walk in on this and you see
Yes,
this.
yes.
What does that do to you? Like how does it change someone?
Well, I
comes
was
from
so-
from Ottawa
Yes,
into this.
but I had a long history of working with disadvantaged people,
Okay.
with youth. They're my favorite species. So, I was a mature professional, so because it's pretty traumatic.
Sure,
Yeah.
I would imagine.
And these children who are cold and hungry and frightened
And alone.
and alone. And God does not mean these children to be alone, but
Right.
it was a culture, a pre-psychological culture where children are kind of told that's God's will.
Right.
What's a child supposed to do with that?
Right.
God's okay
What a
with me being
what a-
hungry and
what a devastating message that is.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, I'll never forget one morning, a bunch of little children way up, maybe close to 10,000 feet. Up, these little children were singing for me in the morning, and they're beautiful people. I brought you some pictures, and if you go to our website, you can see
Yeah.
pictures. And they were singing, and my heart just broke. I'll never forget it because these children were so lovely and so destitute, and so I just thought, okay, I prayed a lot about it, and when I realized what this might be, God knows what I'm not good at. I had no background in international development. I had a solid background in people and the
Right.
psychological aspects, but no desire whatsoever to work in Africa or run an organization or be the face of anything.
Right.
I went kicking and screaming into that. So since then, we've helped 200,000 people. We've had 40,000 people graduate from our intensive programs. We have 22 programs operating all over the mountains. All of our staff are local. We have a full-time staff of very talented people, about 30 staff full-time and about 15 part-time. And we've raised, this year will be $21 million with no government funding.
21 million.
Yep.
Wow.
And we have donors all over the world. We have our biggest funders from the UK. We have donors all over Canada, some in the States, some in Australia, Germany.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is. I love to tell the story because people are, in my opinion, people are barraged with negativity. They're sort of saying, where is God in all of this?
Right.
And Lesotho is a Christian country.
Mm-hmm.
About 95% of the people declare as Christians. Of that, they're predominantly Catholic, but that is changing.
Yeah.
And they pray constantly. They're a wonderful example of faith. But here's this woman who is, only partially equipped for this job, let's be frank.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'd never raised a nickel in my life. I'd never asked for any money from everything. And all of a sudden, I'm an itinerant beggar, right?
Right.
And it's just a wonderful story of what God can do when we trust and when we kind of step out of his way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's interesting to me in what you said, you mentioned prayer several times.
Yes, I'm dependent.
You're obviously fervent in prayer. Leonard Cohen has that
Yes.
that great line. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
That's how the light gets in.
And as I listened to you talk about having to witness what you witnessed in your early stages and your heart broke, that's singing, your heart broke open. And it's in that place that something began, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that ability for and sometimes I think we're afraid to enter into that brokenness. We're afraid of the vulnerability that goes along with that. And you're right that in some cases it becomes easier for us to sort of shelter ourselves so that we don't
Absolutely.
have to know what's going on. If we don't know about it, then it doesn't affect us in some way. But it's hard when you're on the ground and you're staring in the face of that sort of brokenness and suffering. Could you share a little bit about your background is in the Anglican Church, about how your prayer life is, or what drives you to that because you've mentioned a few times about praying on stuff.
I grew up in the United Church.
Okay.
I went to Wesley United
Oh,
Church
Wesley
here.
here, yeah.
And I, when my, so I moved to, long story, but I moved to Ottawa and had my children there and was in the United Church there in the early 80s when I felt the United Church was kind of confused. I remember being head of the sexual orientation committee, and just I felt with small children I needed to be in a church that was a little more clear about what they were doing. And as a parent, I felt I needed spiritual support raising children.
Yeah.
So we moved into a Presbyterian church just down the street, and as I say, I've got this thing for teenagers. So I actually didn't go to church. I had a Sunday school class. It started with 4, but ended up to be 50 teenagers every week for 8 years. No substitutes. I did all the curriculum, just myself and those kids.
Good Lord.
In a closed room. Love them all. And so then when I stopped that and sat in church, I thought, I'm not so sure this is nourishing me, because I love the challenge of teenagers. But that's how I got to the Anglican Church. I'm not much for groupthink, and I like to be in a church where people are challenging ideas and where they're talking about things. The world is suffering terribly, and I've always been very cognizant of that. I can hear people suffering.
Yeah.
And so I need to be in a place, when you were talking about people sheltering themselves, I think psychologically we're so afraid of being subsumed by other people's pain
We had a grief, yeah.
that if we look at it squarely, we won't be able to manage.
Right.
We will just be sucked into the vortex.
Right.
And I've spent most of my life helping people with that.
Very interesting.
So what God needs, I always imagine God's looking around. Okay, who can I trust? If I give you a job, will you hang in, or will you tell me that you're busy on Thursdays because you've got something else to do?
Yeah.
Or you're a little tired, so you just want the week off? Or
Right.
people who are suffering need us to be consistent, to be reliable, to be present.
Yeah.
And that's a commitment that a lot of people are afraid to make. So we've had a lot of interns go over, young people, and helping people learn strategies that will allow them to sit in the middle of grief and loss and fear and not bring their own stuff into it.
Right.
We do, so our programs in Lesotho all have 3 components. One is the psychosocial component that builds resilience. So they talk about grief and loss. As Dave well knows, that's a long process. We talk about fear and anxiety and worry and what gender-based violence. 86% of girls and women in Lesotho report being victims of gender-based violence.
Wow.
So what that does to self-esteem,
Right.
and then the rest. Then we have a lot of educational stuff, so they learn conflict resolution, problem solving. It's all about pulling the cognitive development so people can challenge unhealthy ideas and learn their rights and their responsibilities and stand up for themselves. And then everyone who benefits from our programs is trained and expected to go out and help others. So now that you've got
Yeah, it's
this, there's
reciprocal,
no free
yeah.
lunch.
Yeah.
What are you going to do for
are you
your
gonna do
community?
Go from sort of the psychological support to the education to developing leaders.
Leaderships, that's right. So our programs are long.
Yeah.
Like the grandmother program is 2 years. The young mother program is a year. We have a program for grade 7 girls that goes to grade 7 and 8. That's when you go to high school there.
Yeah.
So because it takes time to change. Human
Yeah.
beings, we're a fragile species. It takes time to really integrate things well enough that we own them. But my conviction is that once people learn to think for themselves, to be able to speak their truth and ask for what they need, they're not going to give it up.
Right.
They own it. It's addictive. It's exciting. And it makes you reinvest in yourself. And that is the best thing when you're hopeless.
And so who is kind of eligible for this in and around what
Every
you're doing?
program has different criteria.
Okay.
So the grandmothers have to be looking after orphans and have no other means of support. So we will go to a community and we'll talk to they're chosen by the chief and the local councils, and we'll say, in this catchment, geographical catchment, you can pick 50. So they discuss it and they pick 50 on those criteria. The young mothers have to be either pregnant or lactating, so in that span, which in Africa they lactate longer, so it could be, they could have an 18-month-old or a 2-year-old. The Pearls for Girls program, we sell jewelry that supports the Girls Leadership Program.
Including the beautiful ones you're
and my
wearing?
beautiful necklace.
Yeah.
And so those girls are in grade 7, but they're mostly orphans and they don't have any other support. We have a program for herd boys who are forced to leave school and go way up into the mountains and look after animals.
Okay.
So they're unsocialized, uneducated, they become sociophobic, frightened of people. They're the most likely to become perpetrators.
Yeah.
And so we have a great program for them, and that's 6 months. We have a computer and life skills class that is 2 months. We've trained priests and chiefs and community leaders. And
Tons going on.
we have
doing a great amount of work
2-month
there.
leadership program for young people in their early 20s.
So how many people on the ground would you have there?
Well, I had to build 2 centers. We had nowhere to work.
Right.
So the English Catholic Teachers Association of Ottawa raised enough money for me to build a small center in a cornfield.
Yep.
An Anglican diocese gave me a piece of land there.
Wow.
And that's been going for 11 years, and they've had 30,000 visitors there.
Oh my gosh.
And then I built this huge, massive center. So we've had about 30,000, 35,000, 40,000 visitors there. It's been open for 10 years. And it has huge training center, and we have 3 computer labs.
So there must be a lot of people on the ground to staff it.
So yes, and that was a process in finding local people and training them in this kind of psychological insight. And we never tell anybody what to think. It's how to think, how to deal with your own issues. So we have 30 full-time staff and about 15 part-time staff.
Wow.
Most of our work is out in the mountains, out in the villages.
So all this training, you were mentioning too at the beginning that obviously when you got there, the AIDS epidemic was rampant and is what it was. What's the situation now as far as AIDS and AIDS awareness? I understand that's part of some of the things you're doing as well.
Oh yes, we do so much health education, sexual and reproductive health, AIDS, all kinds of stuff. So it has the second highest rate of AIDS now in the world. When I first went there, 30% of people were HIV positive. Now it's 25%. So there's improvement. There is
I see
treatment.
that.
But I talk to so many people. People want to help, but development should not be based on emotional decisions.
Right.
How we're going to feel about it, that we want to feel good about ourselves for doing something. It has to be based on what's best for people there. So that's a longer process, a deeper process of consultation, and it's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky because what you're talking about really, I mean, at least I think for me in Anglican parlance, it's really about the baptismal covenant. So reading through your stuff, you talk about the unique approach, restoring dignity and hope while empowering people. And one of the commitments or promises that we make in the baptismal covenant now is that we would strive for peace and unity among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. But that's hard work. It's because you're quite right. That sort of work is not rooted in how is this gonna help me or how is this gonna make me feel better.
Exactly.
It's about giving somebody else back their dignity, and usually what that means is that we have to roll up our sleeves and get a little dirty ourselves, and that we have to invest in somebody else's suffering, somebody else's pain, somebody else's life. And
we have to provide the space for them to discover that themselves.
yes.
Them to, we never allow, Help Lesotho, we have an expression, get over yourself, this isn't about you.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I am never in the vicinity when they're giving out anything. We never allow white people to be the feature.
No.
It's always about them. Everything goes through local staff, and that's all part of this dignity.
Yeah.
Is it not? And it's very hard for us not to make it about us.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that actually sort of, in part answered another question I had, really, which is around sort of colonialism. And I think that's the other piece in that puzzle in terms of it. When we make it about us, we've been raised with a colonialist attitude. No matter how it's what we've been bathed in. We're settler peoples here in Canada, and we know that so much of sub-Saharan Africa, in terms of the colonial history and all that. So I imagine it's a bit of a tricky act that you have to be at least sensitive to how you provide that help without it becoming another. Sometimes there are organizations out there, I guess what I'm getting at, who see Africa yet as a place to go and missionize and
Exactly. It's we don't believe that you can it's not up to us to form that. We are facilitating. So it's all about them and what they're doing. The Lesotho is unique in that it wasn't colonized. It was a British protectorate
I see.
within apartheid.
Right.
Within a colonized country. So it was insular. It's an all-black world in the middle of apartheid and with very little reason for immigration.
Right.
So it was quite protected. If you didn't go outside of that, there wasn't discrimination.
Right.
They don't have any issues because they didn't have any white
They didn't
people
have
there,
it, yeah.
other than engineers and a few people like that. But so it's a country that is one of the most homogeneous populations in Africa. So they all speak the same language, Sesotho, and they have the same religion. They have the same cultural background. So you don't have the religious and ethnic conflicts that you do in a lot of other countries.
Okay.
And that is the facilitating factor on one hand, and it's inhibiting on another, in that whenever you have that degree of homogeneity,
Yes.
it creates very rigid social norms. So to challenge those norms can be very punitive.
Yeah. Hard to penetrate that.
Yes, that is really tricky.
Yeah.
And we have to be very careful. For example, we do so much work toward gender equity, and we've trained 16,000 men gender equity in a very deep way. They love it.
Right.
But you have to be careful that there isn't a backlash. For example, our young mothers, these are very fragile, vulnerable young women.
Yeah.
But once they gain self-esteem and they start to feel good about themselves, often the men are threatened.
Right.
Yeah.
And it can be lethal.
Yeah,
So it's tricky. And because I've lived so long there, I've seen a lot of very bad development. And it's really harmful if it's in the name of God, because there's a vulnerability in a Christian culture that whenever you invoke God's name,
Yeah.
it brings out a lot of other connotations and maybe permissions that shouldn't be there.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, there can be baggage with that for sure.
Yeah.
When
But they pray every meeting starts with prayer.
Yeah.
Every song is a praise song. God is not compartmentalized the way God is here.
Right.
God is mentioned easily and constantly. The king always refers to his faith. So it's the first really Christian country I've ever been in.
Right. And that's a good segue into my next question or just comment that was, here in the Vickers Crossing, we like to look at ways that faith intersects with the public square and where those two roads cross. And something you wrote when you sent us some information before we got together today that I highlighted, which I thought was just a wonderful thing for us to reflect on. You write, such work, which is the work that you're doing, such work is not an option for a Christian. It's a clear mandate. Being a follower of Jesus, as you say, is not a compartmentalized thing that you take care of for an hour on Sunday.
Right.
It's bigger than that, and it's a mandate, isn't it, for you? And that's how I can see where you get that passion to do what you do when you see it through that lens. Yeah.
The other part of my job, I feel God cares about the donors too.
Yeah.
They matter. And I've just seen our work impact our donors. I live in this very unusual world where our beneficiaries just love us. They thank us. 10 years later, they thank us. Our donors are all so happy and appreciative and supportive, and no one's ever tried to manipulate. We've never changed anything
Right.
that we do for money.
Yeah.
We do what we think is right,
Right.
and I feel people will support that if you
Yeah.
do what's right. So, we've had thousands of letters come from children into homes through our child sponsorship program and other programs, the school partnership program, that are filled with God. And because we don't have an agenda,
Yes.
these are homes where God is not welcomed or invited. Thanks very much.
Right.
But people accept it
Right.
because there is no agenda. This is just them being themselves.
Yeah.
And people don't, especially in the last few years, as I travel the country and speak different places, people don't know who to trust anymore.
Right.
In terms of organizations. Like
Yeah.
91% of our revenue last year went to programs.
Wow.
Right.
That's an incredible rate right there.
Yes. And we have amazing governance. But when people who are credible believe strongly in something and they tell their friends, we need to find good things. We need to support good leaders. We need to talk about the good that's happening in the world as an antidote to all this negativity.
Yeah. Particularly now. I mean, I think that
Particularly.
we seem
Yeah.
more divided and polarized than ever, and I think it becomes easy to become cynical about all of it. But really, when you hear about the sort of hands-on, one-on-one work that you're talking about and what you're doing and the transformation that goes along with that, because it's transformative.
Totally.
And I think that there's a hunger for that. I think most people, I know Rob and I in the work that we do, we'll see people that generally when it comes right down to it, what we see are people who are yearning to see things transformed for good. They want to see something.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we always want to be loved, and they want the brokenness in the world to be
They want to see
loved.
resurrection.
They want to see
They want
resurrection.
to see that that new life coming
Yeah.
out of that dark tomb.
Yes.
Somehow.
And so many people want to have meaningful things in their life. And commercialism has been an abject failure as a
Right, yeah.
meaning generator.
Yeah.
And but they just don't know who to trust.
Yeah.
And I take that very seriously. And so I talk a lot about that
Yeah.
when I go around, because we need to talk about it. We need to be trusting people. We need to be people of faith you have to trust. That's
Yeah.
a priori. And we need to step forward and be bold in talking about good things, in talking about possibilities. I gave a talk on the 22nd, I think it was, of December. That was the Sunday before Christmas, at this church. That was the first church I spoke at in 2004 when I came back on October the 23rd, I think, in 2004. And in the end, they gave me $210,000 over 6 years to do this big program. So I've spoken there many times, but I was giving them an impact report.
Right.
When you believe in something,
Yes.
when you're part of something good,
Yes.
you need that reinforced to see the impact, and we see it in our work every day.
Right.
There's no question, and we need to share things like that.
Well, and it speaks to the nature of, putting the flesh on the bones of your faith, so to speak. That notion of intersectionality between faith and the public square. I think it's Reggie McLean or McNeil. I won't get his name right now. Anyway, one of the books I was reading last year about how, grabbing onto that missional idea of church, not being missionaries, but joining God in God's mission. He asserts that God is already at work out there, and we need to go join God in that work. And so, in a way, what you've done is you've gone to that place, allowed your heart to be broken open, so that the light could get in, and saw what God was doing and needing, and what was needed in that place, and have gone, and you've gone to join God in that work. It's God that does the transformative work. It's God that makes the
Exactly.
change. It's just, we're the toolkit, so to speak. And I think that I'm so pleased to hear about what you're doing, because I think it's one of those opportunities for those of us in church land, those of us who hang out in institutional churches, to come to understand that sometimes we can get so mired down. We began today by talking about how we're getting ready for vestry meetings, right?
Exactly.
So let me tell you about the metrics we get. We had a meeting this morning with the clergy, right? So everybody's all, I had a vestry meeting is coming, our annual meeting. And so we got to sit down and say how many people came to church on Christmas, and how many came on Easter, and how many came to second Sunday of September, and how many people did you baptize this year? And these are the metrics we're using to somehow evaluate what church is or how we're doing. Where in fact, the Regley McNeils of the world would say you need to pitch that metric, that measuring rod out, because that's not how you're gonna in any way find out how you're being effective in your walk, in your journey as a community or as Christian individuals. Instead, what you ought to do is be able to take a look at opportunities like the ones you're talking about. Because the church is in decline, yes, but the real rebirth of the church, the new church, we just, since we met, we had that crazy article in the Anglican Church News, that's the Anglican Journal. Gone by 2040, question mark, I said, what a joyful message this is. Turn out the lights in 20 years, we're done. And Bishop Susan Bell wrote this week in a piece to her people in Niagara, that she said, if you're asking me, is the church going to be gone by 2040, my answer is a definitive no. Is a brand of church going to die by 2040? Yes, definitely. And what's going to die is that church that's still using these metrics to measure what we are as church. But if we're able to actually seize the opportunity to engage in those life-giving, transformative, meaningful opportunities to actually make the love and witness of God alive and well in places that are so desperately yearning for it, the church will never die. It's lived to thousands of years right now because of that. That's the part we've got to recapture. And so to me, these are the things that we need to be. Like that community that's over, what'd you say, 10 years now, is giving you $200,000, right? Like that community, and having you come back and bear witness to what's going on there, that's a critical part of what it looks like to be engaged in building the reign of God, in building the city of God. Like that's what it means. That's finding out how God is at work out there somewhere, and going and joining God in that work. Right. Yes. And man, it sounds like you do it well.
And for you to be able to paint that picture for folks, to tell them that's so crucial.
And not to disengage with, I was speaking at something last week, and this lady came up to me and whispered as if she was being blasphemous, but she said, I know I shouldn't say this to you, but I wonder why we aren't helping people in our own communities. Oh, yeah. And I said, well, great question. Yeah. Like, that's a really important question. But the point is, it shouldn't be a competition.
No, I mean, so
We're
go ahead and help the people in your
exactly.
community.
It sounds like God's calling you to help people in your own community.
No one is stopping you.
Nobody.
But when we disconnect with the neediest people in the world, all that's happening right now, in my humble opinion, is the poor are rising up and say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Where's it written that you get to have everything and I don't get to have anything? Right. And that's as inevitable as the day is long. But there's an inverse correlation between the economy and international development. Only, less than 10% of people give to international development on a regular basis.
Right.
And in Canada. Mm-hmm. And when the economy is down, people hunker down and give to their local communities. And it's subconsciously self-preservation.
Yeah.
If I give to my house, I'll benefit somehow.
Right.
Or my children will benefit.
Yeah.
But God's about giving for no return.
Right.
And like I have a PhD. I run metrics. I'm into structure. But I don't engage in the results.
Yeah.
That's God's job.
That's God's work.
My job is the process.
Yeah.
And I'm the worker bee, clearly. Mm-hmm. But we cannot determine those results. When I go to speak to a group, I never think of people as money.
No.
But I always pray that God will open one or two hearts
Yeah.
to join. The reason we've done so well and been so consistent
Mm-hmm.
is because people have stepped forward to help.
Yes.
It's not me. I'm not that great. And that's the point.
Oh, I think she's great. Well, don't you think she's great?
One
so.
person could never in 1,000 years strategize all this. It's a overwhelming proof
Yeah.
of what God can do if you just let him. Her.
Right.
And people coming on it, and they stay. The longevity of our donors. We're just in this love fest.
Yeah.
They write us little notes. They give us money, but they write little encouraging notes with it.
Amazing.
That's what we need. We need to do everything with love.
What is Sister Alice up to nowadays?
I just got a note from her yesterday on WhatsApp. So Sister Alice is the nun that I was my student, and she's still a high school teacher, still a science teacher, and we meet every time. She's on our. We have a local advisory committee there, so I'll be there next week, and a bunch of our alumni have organized this huge reunion. I'm very excited. It's February the 15th. I'm going to get to hug all these kids that I've just loved into adulthood, who've had struggled so. They're so brave. So Sister Alice is going to be featured on this
Okay.
program. So she's a riot. She's very tiny.
Yeah.
And she could talk the legs off a table, and she could sell sand to an Arab. Oh my gosh, she's so charming.
So listening to your story about her and her coming to you as a teacher to get help with something,
Yeah.
reminded me a bit of the gospel this past Sunday in church. We were talking about it was the gospel reading from John about John pointing toward Jesus and that sort of thing, and that this idea that this new life begins, and this journey of walking alongside with God and God's mission begins by pointing or showing someone something to say, look over there.
Yes.
Look over there. I know you've been looking over here, but look over there. And I think about her coming to you just to say, I want to show you something. I want to talk to you about something.
Yes.
And that was kind of the beginnings of
Yes.
of how all this came to be. Just
Yes.
being able to see and turn and see a different view.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden God breaks in
Yeah.
and off it goes, right?
Exactly.
Amazing.
And that's what people are afraid of, that when God's going to break in, they're afraid of the ambiguity.
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
Yeah.
But like Ephesians 2:10 says, we're made for good deeds. Like
That's right.
this is that's why we need meaning. It's primordial. It's built in our
Yeah.
cellular structure. Meaninglessness is the cause of all this depression, and
Yeah.
people are suffering on a very psychological level in our culture, and they need to find ways where they can feel they're doing something.
And the more we humanize people, right, it's
Yes.
easier. I think you're right. We are precognitively sort of wired for helping the other. Watching a piece called "The Sultan and the Saint" about Saint Francis and the Sultan 800 years ago. And there was a neurologist on there who was talking about how we're actually physically hardwired to not want to harm or kill somebody else. That the only way we get to that is by dehumanizing somebody. Once we strip away their human qualities and we turn them into something other than human, then because that's what we got to do in order to be able to
Yes.
to get to that.
Yes.
And there's so much of that going on in the world. So that
Yes.
process of sort of rehumanizing people
Yes.
and getting to know, and to what Rob was saying about the gospel this week about John the Baptist pointing people towards Jesus. David Lose, who's a theologian out of Minneapolis, he writes a little piece about that gospel where he says it's about notice. So notice. So John says, "Hey, look, take note.
Take notice,
Take
yeah,
note. This is what's going on over there." Okay. So once you've noticed it, then you need to share it. So you need to tell others about it. So you go down to Africa, you get your heart broken open, and God gets in. So you've noticed where God is at work, and then you go and you share it with others.
Share it, yeah.
And then the third step, he says, is invite. Then you invite others to become a part of that journey. And so he says it's notice, and then share, and then invite. And in many ways, I think that's really what you've done.
And I think that's really wise. I come from a family of leaders, and frankly, until this, I hadn't had to ask people for anything really, or feel dependent upon other people. And I think that generates a bit of a self-containment and a bit of a pride in yourself somehow in a very unhealthy way. And when I started this, all of a sudden, I had to ask for help all the time. I had to reach beyond myself, my autonomy, beyond my
Your comfort.
Yeah, not just comfort though, but beyond my practice of self-sustainment. And I had to rely on other people, and I had to reach out in all these ways, and it changed my life.
Right.
I realized how much people want to help.
Right.
I realized how many wonderful people there are in the world. We have thousands of donors, and they're so lovely. I adore all of them. Who else wants to help orphans in the middle of nowhere in a country they can't pronounce?
Right.
And I meet them, and really there's not one that I just sit down for coffee and just think how lovely they
Transforms your worldview, doesn't it? As you
It
say,
does,
now I
and
see- I
it
can
changed
see it,
me.
Yeah.
It's very, very humbling.
Yeah. Well, speaking of walking alongside and sharing and telling, we want our listeners to be able to follow along as well. So, Peg, can you give them maybe some information on that, how they can find out more about Help
Thank you.
Lesotho and get
Thank
more
you.
information?
And
about
how
these
can they
stories?
give? And
Yeah.
Thank you
yeah.
for that opportunity. And first of all, when I went the first time, I started writing letters. I had already had two brothers die, and so I didn't want my mother to worry about me, and I didn't know where I was going. So I started writing these letters, and now they have this huge, I write them only when I'm in Lesotho, and they have this huge circulation. So if you want to sign up, people want to sign up for those letters, I'll be writing them when I go. I do 5 or 6 a trip.
okay.
And that's on our website. Our website is Help Lesotho. Lesotho is spelled Lesotho. So the country is Lesotho, the people are Basotho, and the language is Sesotho. And then we have this Facebook page, which is kind of fun because our beneficiaries interact with the donors.
Nice.
So we post something on them, and one of the beneficiaries are, I'm a graduate of that program, and I am. Our theme is Leaders Never Give Up.
Nice.
And the donors make comments, and we post things every week that's happening in Lesotho in real time. And so I'm on Twitter, as is Help Lesotho. We also have this jewelry line that it's called Pearls for Girls, and it's pearls with the number 4, girls.org, and you can shop online. And invite me to places to speak. We need help. We have a very small staff. We are in donated office space. Remax Hallmark Ottawa gives us donated office space
Wow.
for 12 years. The chair of our board did call me cheap at a public speech one time, and I think I have to say I resemble that remark. So people help us. They think of things, Peg could speak here, or we could have something there. And that's how we grow, and that's how we keep the admin costs so low.
Yeah.
So we can be reached on any of those portals or at info@helplesotho.org. Okay. And join the family. We think of ourselves as a family for people who don't have any. And we're a family around the world, all of our donors, and everything is done with love and kindness. And it's just a privilege. Everyone, donors, staff, beneficiaries, we all feel it's a privilege.
We certainly encourage our listeners to go on the website.
Yeah, thank you.
I did a little bit yesterday before today.
Yes, incredible site.
And I
really get
really-
a really better picture of
Thank
of-
you.
of all
And
the
see
work you're
people.
doing.
These are real people. I know
Yeah,
their names.
yeah,
I took
yeah,
most of those pictures.
exactly, yeah.
And I really appreciate, he told me not to say this, I really appreciate Dave
We appreciate Dave doing this
for
too.
suggesting this, because that's how we grow. And I'm sure there's one person out there listening who really is going to respond in an important way.
Absolutely. And
Can I say one more thing
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
fundraising? Because I didn't know anything about it, I've had to learn. I realize there's a big misconception out there. People don't want to get involved with charities or international, because they think people are after their money. And in my experience, it's not so much about your money, it's your advocacy. You don't have to have a lot of money. One example that I use is just before Christmas, about 7 years ago, we got a check for $15,000 from a woman I'd never heard of, and that's a big gift for a first gift. And I called this woman up and I said, "Could we have coffee? I'm so appreciative. Thank you very much. How did this happen?" She said, "Oh, I don't know much about your organization, but my best friend's been talking about you and the organization for years." And she's been giving us $15,000 ever since.
Incredible.
Wow.
People never know who they're influencing.
No.
And one of the things we can always do, whether it's Help Lesotho or something else, find something you believe in, learn about it so that you're accurate and you're passionate, and tell everybody.
Right.
And you can create change that is beyond your imagination.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about money.
Yeah.
And I
Good. No, that's great. Thank you for that.
I want to.
Yeah, notice, share, and invite, right?
That's it.
It's that sharing of it, and
Yeah.
it may be that you don't have the checkbook, but you know people who do. So share the story, you know.
And you never know who does.
That's right.
That's
You know,
right.
At that service just before Christmas, at the end when people are lining out, you don't have time. There's always a pressure to keep
Yeah.
the line moving.
Yeah.
This little lady said, "What do you need?" And I can't even remember what I said. She went home and donated $25,000.
Oh my gosh.
incredible.
Like you never know.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Well, that's a wonderful way to start our 2020.
Isn't it, though?
2020
It's all
year
downhill
in the
from here
Vickers
now.
I'm
Crossing.
so chatty. I'm
Thanks,
sorry.
Dave, for bringing us the best guest at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, that's right.
Now we'll bring some riffraff on next week, and then it'll be like, well, what's that all about?
Peg Herbert is the founder and executive director of Help Lesotho. And I'm going to spell out the website again so people can go on and check it out. HelpLesotho.org. And to find out more. So, Peg, thanks for being here and for sharing your story and inviting our listeners to take part.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure meeting
it's
you both.
incredible.
And good for you for doing this.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Thank you. And thanks to Nephew Dave.
Thanks to Nephew Dave.
who, you got a nice...
I wouldn't say this in front of him, but he's really a lovely, lovely person.
He is.
He's okay.
We like him a lot.
Dave's okay.
Dave's our,
like
yeah.
him. Let's keep
He's
him
my
around.
kind of people.
He's my
my
kind of people.
We watch a lot of Seinfeld. It's like, those people, not my kind of people. But Dave, my kind of people.
The Vickers Crossing is brought to you by our friends at Aleppo Restaurant, 666 Wonderland Road, and the aforementioned Dave at A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. And thanks for dropping by, guys. Ian, good to see you again. Happy New Year. Kevin, good to see you.
Always good to be seen.
And we will be back again for another edition of the Vickers Crossing very, very shortly, we hope.
Yes, we will. We'll do it again
God
next
willing.
week.
Yeah, God willing. We'll be back next week. My name is Rob Henderson, and remember, Kevin, to always look both ways.
Before you cross that street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Catherine Olenek. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vickers Crossing, or find us on Facebook at The Vickers Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!